That's the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in Real Time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in Real Time, and we are celebrating in this hour Juneteenth. Yes, we are continuing our Juneteenth celebration today. This is the day marked as a federal holiday, thanks to President Joe Biden, who signed a bill in 2021 that gave a lot of folks a day off work today. Well, beyond a day of off work and beyond a day of celebration, Juneteenth marks a significant day in U.S. history and American history. And here to help us get a better understanding about Juneteenth is my good friend, Michael Imhotep. He is a national political commentator and radio host. He has a show called African History Network Show, and you can find that on the AfricanHistoryNetwork.com website, as well as everywhere where you get your podcasts. I want to have Michael on in this hour as we're going deep on Juneteenth, because he's been going around the country talking about Juneteenth, educating, raising awareness about this holiday. You know, in places like Florida and Texas and other southern states where they are trying to literally prevent school kids, students in schools, public schools, from learning Black history. It is so important that Black media, that Black journalists, that folks who are allies to Black media continue to use their platforms to raise awareness about these significant holidays and these significant days in our history. I read an article recently from folks who are pretty educated, people with advanced degrees, saying that they didn't learn about Juneteenth until, for some of them, they were actually in college. You talk to a lot of folks today, they know they're off work today. They know banks are closed. They know they're not getting mail today because there's no mail on federal holidays, but they don't know why. They don't know why it was important for Joe Biden to sign into law this as a national holiday. They may have even heard Donald Trump say when he was still president that we talk about Juneteenth because of him. Remember that guy that he told us, that he told the American people? Well, a lot of people may believe that. They may believe that Donald Trump is somehow responsible for the celebration of Juneteenth, which is, again, why today is so important and why this hour is so important, because we, again, those of us in the Black media that have a platform, that have an opportunity to talk to literally millions of people every day, we can't complain about people not teaching our history if we are not talking about our history and educating people about our history ourselves. So I am super excited to talk with Michael and learn what he's been doing leading up to today, Juneteenth, and how we all should be thinking about this important day and what we can all do. It's not too late to engage in some kind of activity beyond barbecuing and beyond, just taking a break from work. We want to make sure that everyone is giving this day the deference and the reverence that it deserves. When we come forward, Michael Imhotep is here, and we are going all in on Juneteenth. KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. Mr. Michael Imhotep is here in this hour. He is a national political commentator. He's also a radio host. His show is called African History Network Show. You can find that on his website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and everywhere where you get your podcast, you can download his podcast. He is a busy brother. He's been very busy leading up to Juneteenth, and I'm so grateful that he took some time out of his busy schedule to celebrate this important holiday with me. Welcome back to the show, Michael. And I'm not kidding. You have been busy. I got a bunch of links for talks that you've been doing. And know you have been going around the country educating folks about this holiday. So talk to us about Juneteenth. Let's just start with the basics. Let's assume somebody's at home watching this, listening to this, and they don't know why they got the day off work today. Please tell them why they're off today.
All right. Well, thanks for having me back on the show, Areva, and your work as well. I like seeing you on CNN and the clips you post on your Instagram page as well. So Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger and about 2,000 Union troops, most of them African-American men, going to Galveston, Texas, and deliver what's known as General Order Number 3. Okay, so this is about 2.5 months after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse, April 9th, 1865, which is looked at as really for most practical purposes, the end of the U.S. Civil War. Okay, so in Texas, there are 250,000 enslaved Africans in Texas at this time in 1865, and Juneteenth commemorates when those enslaved Africans there in Galveston, Texas, get the word that they're free. Now, as I talk about in my presentations, and I just did one on Friday, June 14th at the Motown Museum. I spoke there for a Juneteenth celebration that was taking place. We have to correct the history of Juneteenth and protect the history of Juneteenth. Okay, first of all, Juneteenth was not the last day of slavery. Number one, as you will commonly hear in the media. Number two, all of the 250,000 African slaves there in Texas did not get the word on June 19th that they were free. Okay, June 19th is the agreed upon date to celebrate freedom coming to Texas, but it took Major General Gordon Granger and those Union troops almost a year to go throughout Texas and physically bring Texas back into the Union, under Union control. So, for instance, the enslaved Africans in Houston, Texas, did not get the word until June 20th. The enslaved Africans in Austin, Texas, did not get the word until June 23rd. So, and then the other thing is so he's delivering General Order Number 3 that's enforcing the Emancipation Proclamation from January 1st, 1863. But the Emancipation Proclamation is not what legally freed the slaves. What legally freed the slaves is when the 13th Amendment is ratified on December 6, 1865, when Georgia becomes the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment, because 3/4 of the state legislatures have to ratify an amendment to the Constitution for it to become law. So when we look at Delaware and Kentucky, what gets left out of this conversation in mainstream media oftentimes is Delaware and Kentucky did not abolish slavery until December 18th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was adopted, which is 6 months after Juneteenth. Okay, so when we get deeper into this history, we'll get a better understanding of law, the U.S. Constitution, the Emancipation Proclamation, and see how a lot of this stuff floating around in the media is false. Okay, but what Juneteenth does, it gives us an opportunity to force into a national conversation a history that Republicans are passing laws in state legislatures to suppress the teaching of that history in schools. This is one of the reasons why it's so important.
No, and thank you, Michael. You know, I'm glad you reminded us that all the enslaved people in Texas did not get the news on one day. We got to remind ourselves there's no social media. You know, there's no Facebook, Instagram, or, X account. So if you tell one person, you can literally tell 250,000 people at the same time. There weren't even cars or planes or all the modern conveniences that we have today. So it would take someone on a horse days, if not weeks, to travel throughout the state of Texas to notify these enslaved people about this proclamation, about the Emancipation Proclamation. So, Michael, one of the things we do know is that prior to Joe Biden signing the legislation that makes Juneteenth a federal holiday, there were communities throughout Texas that celebrated Juneteenth when many cities and communities in the North, I'll say, or other parts of the country did not. Why do you think these other places in the North and Northeast were not, keyed into Juneteenth? We don't need something to be a federal holiday, for us to recognize it. So, what do you think the difference was, other than obviously the people in Texas having perhaps a more direct relationship to it? But it always struck me as odd that I grew up in St. Louis, the Midwest, and I don't ever remember hearing about Juneteenth. Definitely didn't hear about it in school, in elementary or high school. And I would suspect that prior to this holiday being, announced or becoming a holiday, there were school kids all over the country outside of Texas that didn't know about Juneteenth.
Right. So a few things. So number one, when we look at the history, and also like blackpast.org has one of the earliest articles dealing with the history of Juneteenth before it really became popular. Their article goes back to 2011. Originally, it was called Jubilee Day. And when you study this history, former slaves there in Galveston, Texas, were having celebrations going back to 1866, commemorating June 19th, 1865. Okay. And it's going to have different names, whether it's called Texas Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, things like this. Right. In 1980, it becomes state law that it's a statewide celebrated holiday. Okay. 1980, Juneteenth becomes a statewide celebrated holiday in Texas. You're going in now. The other thing that's important to note, and I'm going to come to general order number 3 in just a minute. What you're showing is from archives.gov. That's extremely, extremely important, because it's important for us to go read these original documents. The other thing that's important to note is African Americans throughout the country celebrated emancipation days that took place in their state. Okay. So for instance, Washington, one of the oldest celebrations is in Washington, D.C., and that is commemorating April 16th, 1862, when slavery was abolished in the District of Columbia because of what's known as the Compensated Emancipation Act of 1862, which was passed Congress and was signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln at the time. Okay. And what it and also what it did was it paid reparations of up to $300 to slaveholders. But it was a bill sponsored by an abolitionist. Okay. And they realized that they could abolish slavery in the district because Congress has control over Washington, D.C., as opposed to it being autonomous like other cities are. So you have these different celebrations that are going to take place based upon when slavery ended in those respective states, but also during the Great Migration and even prior to the Great Migration, you're going to have African Americans migrating out of Texas, because Texas during the Civil War was a safe haven for slaveholders. Texas was more far removed from major battles during the Civil War, and you're going to have slaveholders coming from Mississippi, coming from Louisiana, coming from Alabama, things like this, going into Texas, taking their slaves into Texas, North Carolina, etc. So when slavery ends, you're going to have some of those African Americans who were not born in Texas returning to the states where they were. Okay. And so you're going to have various forms of celebrations taken that way. And then also versions of Juneteenth are going to be taken up north, out west during the Great Migration, which is basically 1915 to 1970. And you're going to see different periods of time where you have a decreasing amount of celebrations of Juneteenth outside of Texas, and an increasing amount. After the killing of George Floyd, May 25th, 2020, that next month, June 2020, a lot of people across the country found out about Juneteenth because it was during the COVID pandemic. A lot of people were at home and we were tuned in, and there was unprecedented coverage by the media on this. And they tried to get it passed to become a federal holiday then, but Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin blocked it. Then the following year, because you remember Trump was still president in 2020. Then the following year, it passed the House and the Senate, led by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressional Black Caucus. But also keep in mind, this is the hard work of people like Opal Lee, who did a march across the country to get Juneteenth a national holiday. People like Bruce Haith, who created the Juneteenth flag, things like this. So it's a lot of unnamed people as well that were responsible for this becoming a federal holiday. But yes, Joe Biden did sign it into law June 17th, 2021.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to see Opal Lee. I was at the White House celebration of Juneteenth both this year and last year. And last year, which is the first year they hosted a Juneteenth celebration, Miss Opal Lee, 94, I believe at the time, activist, lifelong Texas resident who had been campaigning to make Juneteenth a national holiday for years, actually joined the president and vice president on the stage at their inaugural Juneteenth celebration. And then this year, back at the White House for that celebration. Miss Lee was not there, but you're right. I mean, holidays like this don't happen just because, one president in one office or one even congressperson like Sheila Jackson Lee. It's usually the work of advocates on the ground, those grassroots advocates who are pushing and who are advocating for a law to be passed, particularly this law. And you're right, it was after George Floyd's murder that we started hearing more about Juneteenth, and that's when I said Donald Trump even claimed, trying to take credit for educating us about Juneteenth. I think he tried to take credit for Tulsa, Oklahoma, educating us about Black Wall Street. He lies so much. He takes credit for things he has absolutely nothing to do with. And clearly, Opal Lee, who is known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, had been working on this for many, many years, as well as others. Her relentless efforts were very instrumental. And again, we owe a debt of gratitude for her. And, I think what's so interesting, Michael, about Opal, she started her advocacy journey. She didn't start this in her 20s. She started that journey in her 80s. I think she's about 88, 89. So at that age, she realized that she could still be effective in raising awareness, and her campaign gained momentum, obviously, after the death of murder, I should say, of George Floyd. And we were having this racial reckoning, right, where we were supposed to be really talking about systemic racism and looking for ways to mark the contributions of African Americans. When we come forward, I want to talk more about this General Order 3 and why, we think about Juneteenth as Freedom Day. That's one of the names. People call it Jubilee Day. But how today, so many of the actions today, whether it's the, fight around reparations, whether it's the fight to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion remains a part of our culture at corporations, at governmental entities. How is the fight that happened, amongst abolitionists and folks who were fighting to abolish slavery, the relationship to those fights to the fights that we see today? Because I believe they are inextricably tied. When we come forward, we're going to continue our conversation on Juneteenth as we are celebrating this federal holiday right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. We are back, and Michael Imhotep is here. He's a national political commentator and radio host of the show, the African History Network show. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. And we've been going all in on Juneteenth because it is Juneteenth. So happy Juneteenth to all of you. And we were talking about Opal Lee. She has such an amazing story. As a little girl in 1939, a white mob burned down her family's home in Fort Worth, Texas. Habitat for Humanity, the organization that volunteers and builds new homes, built a new home for Miss Lee. And at 97 years old, again, Miss Lee is the grandmother of Juneteenth. She was able to move into her new home, and she can live out the rest of her life there. I mean, Opal Lee, Michael, is such an amazing icon. She should be a household name in the same way as Coretta Scott King and other civil rights female leaders. We don't often know the women as much as we know the men, but this is one woman's name that everyone should know because of her efforts, leading efforts at age 89. I want to remind people in 2016, at 89, Miss Lee walked from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C. Most people can't walk a block at 89, can't walk a block at 39, but at 89, she walked from Fort Worth, Texas to D.C. to push to get Juneteenth named a national holiday. Didn't happen in that year, but almost 5 years later, in 2021, President Biden signed a bipartisan bill establishing Juneteenth as a federal holiday. Okay, Michael, we were talking about General Order 3. Talk to us about the significance of that order as we think about Juneteenth and some of the struggles and fights that we are engaged in today as African Americans.
Okay, and also I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Opal Lee is a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, my sisters, because I'm a member of Phi Beta Sigma, so I have to put that in there as well. Okay, so
Absolutely.
all right, so General Order number 3. If people can go to archives.gov, which is the U.S. National Archives, and just search for General Order number 3, and when you look at it here, it's important to actually read these documents. So when you scroll down, it actually has what General Order number 3 says. It says General Order number 3 states, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States," that was Abraham Lincoln, "all slaves are free." Now, oftentimes in the media, when we see them talking about Juneteenth and General Order number 3, they'll just show us that excerpt and they'll stop right there. They don't tell us that there's more. The rest of it says this involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. Now 90% of the coverage of Juneteenth in the media won't tell you that General Order number 3 was saying for the former slaves to stay on the plantations and work out work agreements and compensation with their former slave masters. Okay. Then it goes on to say the freedmen, the former slaves, the freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere, end quote. Okay, so even though it's important to commemorate Juneteenth, I talk about how we have to correct the history of Juneteenth, to protect the history of Juneteenth, and explain what General Order 3 was and what it was not. And this only applied to Texas. Like I said, Kentucky and Delaware didn't abolish slavery officially until 6 months after this. So when you hear in the media where they say this was the last day of slavery, that's a lie. Okay. When you hear in the media, I still hear in cable news and in news reports, written and on TV, they say the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. That's a lie. When you go to archives.gov or LOC.gov, which is the Library of Congress, because all these documents you can read. We need to read all this, the U.S. Constitution, the Emancipation Proclamation. It tells you the Emancipation Proclamation was a military strategy that Abraham Lincoln was using to try to bring the South back into the Union, to rob them of the South, the Confederacy, of the most valuable asset, which were their enslaved Africans. And it stated that if the territories in rebellion did not come back into the Union by January 1st, 1863, their slaves would be set free. But the Confederacy has seceded from the Union, starting with South Carolina, December 20th, 1860, set up their own government, set up their own constitution. So the Union had no authority to dictate to the Confederacy to do anything. Okay. And as the Union troops go throughout the South, they're freeing the slaves. They're bringing these territories back into control of the Union. But it's going to take an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to formally free the enslaved Africans, because the U.S. Constitution sanctions slavery. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, known as the 3/5 Compromise, which a lot of people totally misunderstand, that sanctions slavery. Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution laid the foundation for the Fugitive Slave Acts of 1793 and 1850. Okay. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution stated that the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade could be abolished would be 1808, which is why Congress abolished the international transatlantic slave trade January 1st, 1808, because the bill passed Congress March 2nd, 1807, and the international transatlantic slave trade dealt with bringing Africans into the country to enslave them. It became illegal January 1st, 1808. And there are cases of white men who were prosecuted for involved in human trafficking. Now, it was still legal to own slaves, and you can still sell them and have auctions within the U.S., but it was illegal to bring them into the country. And evidence of this is the 1841 famous U.S. Supreme Court case. You studied this in law school, the United States versus the Amistad. 1841 U.S. Supreme Court case. When you go to archives.gov, you can read some of the original court documents. It tells you that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal for that slave ship to come into U.S. waters because the international transatlantic slave trade had been abolished. And they ruled that those Africans, Joseph Q and those Africans from Sierra Leone, had the right to take up arms on that ship. There was a mutiny on that ship, and they had the right to fight for their freedom. And they ruled that they were never slaves. And it tells you that when they were captured and brought into the U.S., it violated international treaties, because there were international treaties that European nations entered into, like Great Britain, that to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade. So when you get deep into this history, you deal with history, economic empowerment, law, and politics. And as I talk about, and when I speak at Juneteenth celebrations, I tell people in these celebrations, we have to incorporate history, economic empowerment, law, and politics into these celebrations. Juneteenth cannot be the black version of the 4th of July, where we sit around and get drunk, eat pork, barbecue, play games, and don't deal with history, economic empowerment, law, and politics. Because when you study early celebrations,
Michael, are you saying the brothers can't play dominoes on Juneteenth? Is that what you're saying?
We can have fun. We can have fun. When you study early Juneteenth celebrations, they play games. They have fun. They honored former slaves. They honored the oldest former slave, things like this. And then later on, you're going to have politicians that come and speak to them. Also, those Juneteenth celebrations, especially in Texas, are going to be like family reunions where lost loved ones are reuniting, because we're trying to put the family back together after slavery ends. This is one of the things the Freedmen's Bureau, the U.S. Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, created by Congress. This is one of the things it's helping us do to reunite the family after slavery ends. So we can have fun, but we got to put some purpose into this. We cannot just have a day off from work.
With a purpose.
A party with a purpose.
It's got to be a party with a purpose. But one of the things I want to go deep on when we come forward, Michael, you raised some good points about that general order, right? We only hear about selective parts of that, but the part that deals with the economics, because we're having this conversation in the nation right now about reparations. The California Black Legislative Caucus has started a tour to travel the state of California to raise awareness about 14 bills that are part of its reparations package, trying to get these bills passed. And a part of the conversations about reparations makes people squirmish whenever we talk about money and paying direct payments of cash to people who are descendants of enslaved Africans. And we know, and you just said it, that slave owners, former slave owners, were paid for the loss of their enslaved people. So this country has
that was just in Washington, D.C. That was just Washington,
reparations. Hold that thought. So when we come forward, I want to talk about how we should be thinking about this general order number 3, celebration of Juneteenth, and the current day reparations movement that is taking place all over this country. Stay with us. When we come forward, we've got lots to talk about.
Right.
We are back, and Michael Imhotep is here. He's a political commentator. He's a radio host, and he is a wealth of knowledge. Not just stuff that he's read in a paper. He goes to the primary sources. He goes to those websites that are hosted by our U.S. government, and he finds those primary source documents, and he reads them. Yeah, funny. Somebody reads. Yes, Michael does read. So whenever he's on the show, I can always count on him to give us the fine print, the things in these really important documents that get glossed over in the media. You might hear a headline, but you rarely get to know, the entire contents of some of these important source documents. It's Juneteenth. We're celebrating Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to all of you. Many of you are off work today, and we are telling you why this day is so important. And we've been talking about this order, General Order 3, that became significant to this date. And also I wanted to bring this conversation forward, Michael, to talk about that order, what happened as enslaved Black people were being freed around reparations, because we're in this national conversation now about reparations. I'm involved in several cases for reparatory justice. We've seen lawsuits filed against the reparations plan in Evanston, Illinois. We know there's a bill on reparations that's stuck in the U.S. Congress. But help us understand the relationship between reparations today and what was happening as far back as the 1800s around reparations.
Okay, so I'm so glad you asked that question, because March 2nd, 2024, I delivered a fantastic historical presentation to the Detroit Reparations Task Force here in Detroit. They asked me to do a presentation for them, okay? So I've been following what's going on in California. I interviewed Robin Ruth Simmons twice on the African History Network show. Yes, they're being sued. And when I first interviewed her, she said she knew lawsuits were coming. I said that too. I know lawsuits are coming as well. So you asked the question before the break, why are people so squirmish when it comes to talking about reparations and paying out money for African Americans? Okay, one, Americans are very ignorant of history. And one of the things I talk about Juneteenth gives us the opportunity to educate America on this history, that Republicans are passing laws in states to suppress the teaching of this history in school. And your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. So we have to use this as an opportunity to also push for reparative justice. Now, what I told the Detroit Reparations Task Force, because 2/3 of Americans are against reparations, and there was I think it was a Gallup poll that documented this. Okay, 2/3 of Americans are against reparations. I told them, and this is what I tell everybody: don't put the term reparations on anything that you actually want to get passed, especially if white people are the majority of the people that got to vote for it. Take the policies. The California Reparations Task Force, they put out about 115 policy recommendations. I've read their executive summary of the preliminary report and the final report. Their report is the most extensive study on African Americans since the Kerner Commission report of 1968. Take those 115 policy recommendations, create versions of that at the federal, state, and local level to repair the damage. Because when you study their report, they talk about what happened at the nationally to African Americans, and specifically in California. The other thing is, California does not have a deep history of slavery. They've documented, in the Reparations Task Force, they've documented between 1,500 to 4,000 African Americans that were in some form of slavery from about 1850 to 1860. Here in Michigan, contrary to popular belief, Michigan does not have a deep history of slavery. Okay, in 1830, the U.S. Census documented that Michigan had 32 slaves. In 1782, when we look at Detroit, it was 1773. Detroit had 73 slaves. 1782, Detroit had 170. The reason why is because the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. And you can go to LOC.gov, Library of Congress website, or archives.gov and read it. The Northwest Ordinance applied to the Northwest Territory, which included Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And that largely abolishes slavery, which is one of the reasons why Michigan and Detroit doesn't have a large slave population, whereas Mississippi, in 1860, Mississippi had over 430,000 enslaved African people, right? So you have to understand the history of the area, the state, and the city that you're talking about. A lot of the what I call reparations reactionaries jumped on Evanston, Illinois, and said what they were doing wasn't dealing with slavery. But if you actually read the 70-page study that Dino Simmons did for the city council there in Evanston, Illinois, and I read a lot of that study, Evanston, Illinois abolished slavery in 1818. Evanston, Illinois wasn't founded until the 1840s. Evanston, Illinois does not have a history of slavery, but Evanston, Illinois has a rampant history of housing segregation going back to the late 1890s. So this is what they were focusing on. And what I explained to the Detroit Reparations Task Force and the people who were there is that cities are going to, or should be held responsible for repairing the damage that the city was responsible for inflicting based upon their laws and policies. You can't expect the city of Detroit to try to repair the damage that the federal government did. They don't have those type of resources. Okay. So you have to understand history and actually what happened there to understand what needs to be repaired. And with the Detroit Reparations Task Force, they're focused on, dealing with housing segregation, because there was a rampant history of that and the harm from that, and creating economic opportunities for African Americans. Okay, theirs is not focused. Their charge, it was put on the ballot. Okay, here in Detroit, and it passed the ballot. It was voted on by citizens. That was not focused on dealing with slavery, because that's not the history of Detroit. Okay,
well, so let me ask you this, Mike. One of the things that let me ask you this. One of the things that's intriguing to me is the notion that slave owners were paid because they lost their laborers. They were paid. And this country has a history of paying reparations. But again, when it comes to paying Black folks reparations, people have selective amnesia. So General Order 3 talked about Black folks becoming employees and establishing an employer-employee relationship. That didn't happen. We know many enslaved people remained working for free. Their wages were stolen from them by slave owners, even after the 13th Amendment became a part of the U.S. Constitution, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, even after all of these, legal edicts were passed. There were many, many, many thousands of African people who are now, we're going to call them Black people, African Americans, who still were never, ever paid.
Right. So, first of all, when I talked about the Compensated Emancipation Act of April 16th, 1862, that only applied to slave owners in Washington, D.C. One, and people can go to Senate.gov, which is the official website of the U.S. Senate, and search for that Compensated Emancipation Act. They have the historical information on that. Number one. Number two, yes, after the Civil War ends, 1865, we know 1866 National Labor Union is created, and a lot of these national labor unions are going to be created to lock African Americans out of the jobs we were doing for free for 246 years. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Now, up here on the screen right now, this is an excellent article from SmithsonianMag.com. Created 150 years ago, the Justice Department's first mission was to protect Black rights. The U.S. Department of Justice was created in 1870 by an act of Congress during Reconstruction, largely to enforce the new rights that African Americans were given. And one of the first things they were doing is prosecuting Klan members and prosecuting people who were attacking African American elected officials, and even attacking white Republicans, things of this nature. So, when you talk about, a lot of people give the example of Japanese Americans, right? And Japanese Americans got $1.6 billion handed out between 1988 and 1998. Okay. When you research that in justice.gov, official website of the U.S. Department of Justice, they have an article that documents what happened. That went to approximately 82,250 Japanese Americans. And when you read it, it was very specific. It went to those who were actually put into internment camps or those who had to flee. It didn't go to future generations, contrary to what a lot of people believe. It didn't go to future generations, things like this. It was very specific. One of the reasons why it's very specific is because, as you know, Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination in federally assisted programs, bans race-based policies. Okay. And then also in the state of California, they have a similar law, which is why the California Reparations Task Force voted 5-4 to base their any type of benefits that are given out based upon lineage, because they know lawsuits are coming and race-based policies in the state of California are illegal as well. So when we put together any type of reparative justice programs, we have to also understand the laws that we're dealing with and navigate throughout that and structure them so that they will withstand legal challenges. Because if Ed Blum, white conservative activist Ed Blum, filed a lawsuit to overturn affirmative action in college admissions, and Donald Trump's 6-3 conservative court struck that down. All of this, they're attacking all this. DEI, the Fearless Fund, the African American Woman, the Fearless Fund, that's tied up in federal appeals court. Okay. So when we deal with this, it has to be structured so that it can withstand legal challenges.
Excellent, excellent points, Michael. We are out of time, but thank you so much for spending this hour with me and educating my audience on Juneteenth. Again, folks are off work today, and there's a reason you are off work, and it's not just so that you can eat barbecue and play games. Just do that, but also take advantage of this opportunity to educate yourself, raise awareness, and definitely if you have kids in the house or you're a grandparent or aunt or uncle, we have to teach this history to our kids. We cannot depend on or expect even our schools to do it. So we have an obligation ourselves. And those of us that have a platform that get to talk to millions of people every day, we definitely have an obligation to continue to raise awareness.
Real quick, Michael, you had an announcement real quick. Go.
Yeah, join me Sunday, June 30th, 2024 for my new 10-week online course, Black Resistance Movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Most importantly, we look at how we fought back against white supremacy and racism, the various ways we did that. Visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register today, watch the class live or on demand. We'll see you in class. Thanks,
all right,
Roland.
thanks a bunch. And again, folks, we'll see y'all tomorrow from the Poor People's Mass Assembly here in the nation's capital.
Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Scroll down. We have my new Juneteenth lecture there. It's a 3-hour lecture. If you register for this class, you're going to get the Juneteenth lecture in digital download format, okay? But you can order it in DVD or digital download format. You can register for the first class I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Now, we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch these anytime. So even after the course is over with, you can still go back and watch the class, okay? A year from now, 2 years from now, you'll still have full access, and you can watch the class. This content is PG-13, so you can use this with your children. Okay, so it's not overly graphic. I don't do a lot of cursing or anything like that. And it's very visual. So there's articles that we reference, books that we reference. I show you usually the book references on the screen, so you don't have to buy any of the books if you don't want to. But register here. We're going to do a class introduction right now. I teach this at my online school, so you can register for this course. Click right here, register for full course at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We just posted the link here in the thread of the broadcast. You can also support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael. There's some like 5 or 6 fake African History Network Cash App accounts out there that I have identified, like these right here. Oh, and you can click on a Cash App link right here. Here's our QR code. Okay. And then here's our link for PayPal as well. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, finance our Sunday night show, the African History Network show. I usually do that Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our social media platforms as well. All right, we have to get out of here. Hopefully you learned a lot today. You can email me through the website if you have any questions, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll see you in class. Remember, right now is corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. And your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. Okay, so we'll see you in class. Listen to the African History Network show. And Wakanda, right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever.